My name is Lyra Bennett. I'm 38 years old, and I never thought the coldest moment of my life would come from my own mother. I walked into the house with a casserole dish in my hands, ready to surprise everyone for Sunday dinner, like I used to. Mom glanced at me over her wine glass and said, "Did you not get the message? You're not part of this family anymore." I stood still. The silence around the table was deafening, so I smiled, gently placed the dish on the counter. "Then I won't stay where I'm not welcome." And I walked out, leaving more than just dinner behind. Before I go further, tell me, have you ever been treated like an outsider in your own family? Drop a comment, hit like, and follow if you've lived through family betrayal and found the strength to choose yourself. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I wasn't always the one on the outside. There was a time, years ago, when I thought love in our family was just quiet, subtle, the kind that didn't need grand gestures or birthday balloons. But I was wrong. It wasn't quiet. It was selective. I grew up in a modest 2-story house in Hartford, Connecticut. My mother, Margot, always kept everything spotless. Even our doormat looked like it had never seen a shoe. But warmth? That didn't live there. She loved my sister Celeste out loud. Hugs in the morning, compliments for just breathing. "You look like a movie star, sweetheart," she'd chirp, tucking a curl behind Celeste's ear like we were in a shampoo commercial. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the independent thinker. At least that's what Dad called it. Margot had other words. Difficult, distant, dramatic. If I spoke up at dinner, it was not the right time. If I got an award at school, she'd nod politely and ask if I'd cleared the dishwasher. Celeste, on the other hand, could spill juice on the couch and somehow be called expressive. But I didn't mind. Not back then. Because I had Dad. Raymond Bennett wasn't a flashy man. He wore the same brown leather shoes for 15 years. He read the paper every morning and watered the plants like they were friends. But he saw me. Really saw me. When I was 10, he taught me how to fix the ticking sound in the old kitchen clock. I remember his hands, weathered but steady, guiding mine. "You've got a sharp mind, Lyra," he told me. "Never let anyone make you feel small for it." And I never forgot that. Every Sunday, we'd sit on the porch and talk about the sky, how it changed, how it stayed the same. Those were the quiet pockets of peace I carried through the noise of everything else. Celeste would run past in her ballet outfit, showing off some new spin. Margot would be snapping pictures like Celeste had just discovered gravity. No one noticed me sitting with dirt under my nails from planting basil with Dad, but he noticed. One evening, when I was about 34, he leaned in during dinner and whispered, "I'm retiring soon. Time finally caught up with me." I smiled, said I was proud of him, but something tugged at my chest, because I knew what that meant. Less income, more time at home. And in this family, that kind of shift was like pulling the wrong brick out of a Jenga tower. Still, I told myself things would hold. Dad would be around more. Maybe the family would grow closer. Maybe, just maybe, Margot would notice I'd been here all along. But deep down, I knew better. It's strange, the things you remember most, not the birthdays or the family trips, though we had those, of course, all posed and polished for the holiday cards, but the small things, the sideways glances, the empty chair you were told to give up, the plate with less food than everyone else's, the feeling of being invisible while sitting right there. Celeste always had a spotlight. She didn't demand it, at least not in the beginning. It was handed to her like a gift she didn't ask for but quickly learned to love. At dinner, if she interrupted, my mother would say, "Oh, let her finish, Lyra. She has something important to say." When I interrupted, I was being rude. If Celeste wore something a little daring, Mom would beam. "She's got style, doesn't she?" If I wore anything other than beige or navy, she'd raise an eyebrow and ask if I was trying to make a statement. The message was always clear. One daughter was the dream, the other, me, was tolerated, with conditions, and I told myself it didn't matter. I had Dad, and I had my books, my garden, my own quiet corners of the world where I didn't need approval to breathe. But over time, something started to shift, or maybe I just started seeing it more clearly. The distance between Mom and me wasn't a gap to be bridged. It was a wall, built brick by brick, and I was done trying to climb it. Celeste went off to college and came back shinier than ever. Blonde hair, perfect nails, big personality. She had stories from Ibiza, photos from Santorini, and a new boyfriend every holiday. Mom would greet her at the door like royalty, arms open, voice 3 octaves higher. When I came home, it was a nod, a glance at my shoes. "Oh, you made it." Still, I tried. God, I tried. I once brought homemade muffins to Thanksgiving. Spent hours perfecting them, even tied little name cards on each one. Celeste walked in an hour late with a store-bought pie and got applause. I got asked to make room in the fridge. But the worst part wasn't even the comparison. It was the way no one questioned it. No aunts pulling me aside to say that wasn't fair. No cousins reaching out afterward, not even Dad. He'd just squeeze my hand under the table and say, "It won't always feel like this." And maybe that's what hurt the most, that he saw it and stayed quiet. I didn't hate Celeste. She wasn't cruel, not directly. In fact, she barely noticed me. And maybe that was the point. She wasn't my enemy, she was just the mirror, the reflection of everything I wasn't allowed to be. It all boiled beneath the surface for years, like a kettle just below the whistle. Until Dad's retirement. He was the one piece holding everything steady, the quiet glue between all the sharp edges. When he said he was stepping back from work, something inside me flinched. Because I knew the house would shift, the balance would tip. And when the glue's gone, all you're left with is dust. The phone call came at 6:17 a.m. I remember the time exactly, because I'd just poured my first cup of coffee and was watching the early light crawl across the living room floor. My phone buzzed. Mom's name lit up the screen. She never called me that early, hardly ever called me at all. Her voice was tight, not panicked, but cold and clipped. "Your father collapsed in the bathroom. The ambulance just left." I dropped the mug, didn't even notice the coffee soaking into the rug. By the time I reached the hospital, they'd stabilized him. Mild stroke, they said. Temporary memory loss, weakened left side, some speech slurring. He'd need physical therapy, maybe months of recovery. He looked at me from the hospital bed and tried to smile, his hand twitching as he reached for mine. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he whispered, the words thick but tender. I nodded, even though my chest felt like it was caving in. Mom stood near the window, arms folded, eyes distant. Celeste wasn't there. I figured maybe she was flying in, maybe she didn't know yet. But hours passed and no word, no call, no flowers, just silence. By day 3, the nurses began asking about discharge plans. "I work full-time," Mom said. "I can't just put everything on hold." I looked at her stunned. "He just had a stroke." "I know, LYRA, but I have obligations. I can't bathe a grown man, for heaven's sake. Besides, you work remotely, don't you? It makes more sense." That was the first time she said it, like it was a casual idea. By the end of the week, it was a decision. I requested a leave of absence from my job, 1 month, maybe 2. I told myself it was temporary, that it was the right thing, that family came first. But I knew deep down this wasn't a 2-month favor. This was me stepping into the role no one else wanted to touch. Dad came home in a wheelchair. The first night, I slept on the floor beside his bed, afraid he'd fall again. The second night, I didn't sleep at all. Mom floated in and out of the house like a guest. She'd pop into the living room with perfectly applied lipstick and a to-go coffee, say things like, "Thanks, honey, you're a lifesaver," then breeze out to lunch with her friends. Celeste sent a text. "Thinking of you guys. Hope Dad's doing okay. Swamped with work right now, XOXO." That was it. I became the nurse, the scheduler, the emotional buffer. I changed bedding, learned how to help him into the shower, recorded his meds, tracked every doctor's visit, encouraged him through frustration when he couldn't lift a fork or button a shirt, and still, I clung to the belief that my effort might matter, that Mom would see it, that Celeste would at least acknowledge it, that love somehow would come out of this. But love didn't come, only more expectation. One afternoon, as I spoon-fed Dad homemade soup, Mom wandered in and said offhandedly, "I've been thinking, we should discuss financial power of attorney, it would just be easier." My hand froze in midair. "Easier for who?" I asked, not looking at her. She smiled faintly. "For the family, of course." And in that moment, I felt it. Like someone had just turned down the lights on a stage I hadn't realized I'd been performing on. I wasn't a daughter, I was a convenience. And convenience doesn't get a curtain call. The days started blending together. Mornings meant medications. Afternoons were therapy appointments and tracking blood pressure. Evenings were soft food, slow walks down the hallway, and gentle reminders that the year was, in fact, still 2022. My world had shrunk to a few square rooms, and one man I loved more than he probably ever knew. But everything else? Everything outside that? It just disappeared. I stopped taking calls from friends. I missed deadlines at work. Eventually, HR stopped checking in. I knew what that meant. But I didn't have time to grieve a job. I was too busy trying to keep my father from slipping further away. Meanwhile, the rest of the family lived untouched. Celeste sent a video from a beach resort in Aruba. The ocean sparkled behind her like it was mocking me. She was tanned, smiling, cocktail in hand. "Love you, Daddy," she said, blowing a kiss to the camera. He watched it in silence. I watched him, and then he smiled, a tired, wistful smile. "She looks happy." I nodded, but something inside me tightened, because I was here, right here, and no one seemed to notice. One evening, while I was folding laundry in the living room, I overheard Mom on the phone. "Yes, she's still here," she whispered, as if my presence was some uninvited guest. "I know, but it's just easier this way. She doesn't complain." I didn't say anything. I just folded the last towel a little slower than the rest. That night, Dad had a hard time sleeping. He was restless, frustrated that his body wouldn't obey the way it used to. "It's like being locked in a house with broken doors," he mumbled, staring at the ceiling. "I want to move, but nothing opens." I reached for his hand. "You're not alone in that house, Dad." He turned to me then, eyes glassy. "I know who you are, LYRA. I know what you're doing." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed up. But in that silence, something passed between us. Something real. Later, I found him scribbling in a notepad. His handwriting was shaky, but deliberate. He shoved it under a book when Mom walked in. She didn't notice. She breezed by in her silk robe, muttering about a spa appointment she was late for. I watched her kiss his forehead, more out of performance than affection. Then she turned to me. "I need you to pick up a few things from the pharmacy later, and maybe try to vacuum before dinner. The carpet's starting to look sad." I looked down at my shirt, stained with soup. My hair was pulled back in a knot I hadn't undone in days. My legs ached, my back ached, my heart... Well, that didn't even register anymore. But I nodded, because I had long since learned that in this house, effort was expected. Gratitude was optional. There's a strange moment in caregiving when you stop being a daughter and start feeling like a live-in employee. No one tells you when it happens. It just shifts. For me, it was around week 6. Dad had improved slightly. He could stand now with help. He cracked small jokes again, though the punchlines landed slower. But the light was still there, flickering. I was in the kitchen refilling his pill organizer when Mom entered with 2 glasses of wine. Only one had actual wine in it. The other was just water with lemon. "I thought we could talk," she said, offering me the water like it was some kind of reward. I sat down, exhausted, suspicious. She didn't waste time. "I've been speaking with Mr. Caldwell, your father's financial advisor." I nodded slowly. I hadn't heard that name since I was in college. "There are some adjustments we could make to streamline things," she said, smoothing the napkin in her lap like it held the key to the next sentence. "Especially now that your father isn't fully capable." My stomach clenched. "What kind of adjustments?" She smiled too quickly. "Nothing drastic. Just putting some things under my name for easier management. His pension, the trust, and the house, of course, in case decisions need to be made quickly." I sipped my lemon water. Tasted like guilt. "You want power of attorney?" I said flatly. Her smile faltered for a half second. "I want what's best for this family." That word, family, it clanged around the room like silverware dropped on tile. I looked around. The kitchen where I'd grown up, the stove I once burned cookies in, the fridge where my kindergarten drawings used to hang. Now it all felt staged. "Did Dad agree to this?" She waved her hand. "He's not in a state to understand the logistics, but I'm his wife, LYRA. He trusts me." And that's when the light changed. Something inside me blinked on. Later that night, I helped Dad back into bed. His movements were slow but deliberate. He was quieter than usual, like something had settled in him that even he couldn't name yet. As I adjusted his blanket, he reached out suddenly and tapped my wrist. "I know what they're circling," he whispered. I froze. "What do you mean?" His eyes met mine, clear, sharp. "Just wait. When the time comes, you'll know." He pressed a small envelope into my hand. It was thin but firm, sealed with tape, no writing on the outside. "Don't open it yet," he said. "Wait until you feel like you have to." "Dad?" But he had already turned toward the wall, his back to me, breathing slow and steady like the conversation had never happened. I sat beside him for a long time that night, holding that envelope in both hands, feeling the weight of something I didn't yet understand. Mom walked past the door an hour later. She didn't look inside. She never did. Celeste showed up on a Thursday. No warning, no call, just a glossy black SUV pulling into the driveway like a celebrity had arrived for a press tour. She stepped out wearing designer sunglasses and heels that had no business being near gravel. A silk scarf was wrapped perfectly around her neck like she was heading to Cannes, not our front porch. I was elbow-deep in garden soil trying to revive Dad's neglected basil patch. "Oh," she said, peering down at me. "Still playing farmer?" I stood, brushing off my hands. "Still playing daughter?" She smirked, air-kissed my cheek, and breezed inside like she owned the place. I followed her in, suddenly hyper-aware of the dirt on my clothes, the smell of ointment and detergent in the air. The house wasn't ready for guests. Or, more accurately, it was only ready for the kind that pretended not to see what was real. Dad was in his recliner. He lit up when he saw her. She leaned over, kissed his forehead, and pulled out her phone before he even finished saying her name. "Let's get a quick photo," she said. "You look adorable like that." He laughed. I didn't. Mom appeared a few minutes later, full of delighted surprise that felt more rehearsed than spontaneous. Within moments, they were sipping espresso in the dining room, voices rising with laughter I hadn't heard in weeks. I stayed quiet, cleaning dishes that weren't dirty. Later that evening, Celeste joined me on the back porch. Her heels clicked lightly across the wood. She held a glass of red wine she didn't offer to share. "This place hasn't changed," she said, staring out toward the overgrown fence line. "Nope," I replied, not turning to face her. She took a sip. "Listen," she began too casually. "Mom and I were talking earlier, about the future." I stayed silent. "I mean, obviously things are uncertain with Dad and, well, there's the house, the accounts, the lake property. You know how things get messy if there's no plan." Still, I said nothing. My heart was thudding, not in surprise, but in something colder. Recognition. Celeste tilted her head, studying me. "I just think it would be smart if we all agreed ahead of time, so no one feels left out." I turned to her then. Really looked. Her nails were flawless. Her makeup subtle and expensive, not a wrinkle in sight, though the smile she wore was anything but kind. "Left out?" I said finally. "Like not getting invited to a wedding? Or like showing up to find someone else already packing your memories into boxes?" She blinked slowly. "I'm just saying," she replied, "if Dad's condition worsens, it's only fair we divide things reasonably." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stared at her until she got uncomfortable enough to walk back inside. That night, I sat with Dad longer than usual. His hand was colder, his eyes more distant. Before I left the room, he squeezed my fingers, just once. Not for comfort, but for clarity. A quiet gesture that said, "I see what's happening too." I kept the envelope close after that, tucked into a drawer beneath my sweaters. I hadn't opened it yet, but I thought about it more and more. Because when your own sister starts measuring your father's breath in dollar signs, you realize something terrifying. Grief hasn't even arrived, and already the wolves are at the door. I wish I could say I was surprised when he died. But when someone starts fading in front of you piece by piece, you don't expect a thunderclap. You expect a whisper. And that's exactly how it came. It was a Tuesday morning, cloudy, quiet. I'd gone downstairs to fix Dad's tea, and by the time I returned, he was gone. His eyes were closed, peaceful, his hand still resting on the edge of the blanket like he'd just drifted off for a nap he didn't intend to end. I stood there for a long time holding that cup of tea. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone right away. I just sat beside him and breathed. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even grief, not yet. It was something quieter. Like part of me had been holding my breath for months, and now I could finally exhale. When the funeral arrangements began, everything shifted into fast forward. Suddenly, Mom had opinions. Celeste had preferences. They chose the venue, the flowers, the catering, all in a flurry of black dresses and soft piano playlists. They picked a chapel that Dad had never set foot in, filled it with people who barely knew his name, and delivered eulogies that sounded more like resumes than memories. Celeste stood at the pulpit, her voice soft and controlled. "Dad was a strong man," she said. "He taught us integrity, strength, and the value of hard work." "Us?" I wanted to laugh. Not out loud, of course. Just that hollow kind of laugh that gets stuck behind your ribs. Because Celeste didn't know his favorite breakfast was soft-boiled eggs with cracked pepper. She didn't know he liked jazz when he was in a good mood, and silence when he wasn't. She didn't know he had a scar on his left ankle from falling off a bike at 12, or that he once tried to write a novel and gave up after 20 pages. But I knew. I knew all of it. I sat in the second row, unnoticed, while people whispered around me. Wasn't LYRA the one who cared for him? She practically lived here these past few months. Funny she's not speaking today. I didn't speak because I wasn't asked. They wanted clean, controlled, marketable grief. I had the real kind, the messy kind, the kind that didn't photograph well. After the service, I watched Celeste hug guests in the reception hall, her tears perfectly timed, mascara untouched. Mom floated beside her, nodding graciously, accepting condolences like compliments. No one asked how I was holding up. No one noticed when I stepped outside into the parking lot and leaned against the brick wall just to breathe. That's when Simon found me. Simon Reeves. We'd known each other in college, lost touch, somehow drifted into different solar systems. But when Dad got sick, he started texting again. Quiet check-ins, no pressure. That day, he didn't say much, just stood next to me and handed me a small paper napkin. "I figured someone forgot to give you one," he said. I looked down. A single mini lemon tart was sitting there. Dad's favorite. The first tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. Simon didn't flinch. He didn't try to hug me or offer empty words. He just stood beside me and let the silence say what no one else in that building would ever understand. I didn't open the envelope right away. For days, it sat on my nightstand, tucked beneath a worn paperback and an old mug of tea I kept forgetting to throw away. I'd glance at it sometimes, let my fingers brush the edge of it, but I wasn't ready. I told myself it was about timing, about space, about grief. But the truth was simpler than that. I was afraid it would contain exactly what I hoped for. Or worse, nothing at all. It wasn't until a few nights after the funeral that I finally did it. The house was silent. Mom and Celeste had gone to bed after another day of reviewing insurance documents and handling logistics. I sat alone in the kitchen, the same place Dad used to peel oranges while humming Sinatra under his breath. The envelope was thinner than I remembered, light, almost forgettable. But what it carried was anything but. There were 3 things inside. First, a folded letter in Dad's handwriting. Crooked. Slower than it used to be. I had to hold it close to make out the words. "Lyra, if you're reading this, it means I've left you one more mess to clean up. I'm sorry for that. I wish I could have stayed longer. I wish I'd said more, done more. But you and we always understood each other in quiet ways. So maybe this is my last quiet way. I've left you the Brookline apartment. You remember it? Where we used to stop for ice cream after doctor's appointments. It's not much, but it's yours. Fully paid. No one else knows. The second thing, I moved the savings account last fall. Everything in it, what's left after taxes, bills, and nonsense, belongs to you. I know they'll come looking. Let them. And the last thing, don't forget who you are. And don't let them convince you that kindness means obedience. It doesn't. You have always been my greatest piece. Love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times. Once with steady hands. The second time with tears sliding silently down my neck. The third time barely able to breathe. Then I unfolded the second item. A property deed. Brookline, 2-bedroom, balcony, my name printed cleanly at the bottom. The third was a business card. Simon Reeves, financial consultant. On the back, in Dad's shaky handwriting, "He'll help you, if you let him." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. It came in a letter no one else would read. It came in the form of an apartment tucked away in a part of town I used to associate with soft serve and watching ducks by the river. It came in the knowledge that even though he couldn't protect me while he was alive, he had found a way to hold my hand once more, quietly, deliberately, after death. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I curled up in Dad's old armchair, the letter still in my hand, and stared out the window at the garden we used to plant together. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I was no longer standing alone. The next morning I woke up with the letter still in my hand. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that hums behind your ears, like a warning, like something waiting. I tucked the letter back into the envelope, folded the deed, and slid both into the inside pocket of my coat. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew one thing for sure. They weren't going into the family safe. At breakfast, Mom and Celeste were already at the kitchen table, sipping coffee from matching mugs that read, "Blessed." I wondered if they even knew the irony. They were talking about bank statements, joint access, something about consolidation. Mom turned to me casually, as if she were asking for the salt. "We'll need your signature on a few things this week. Just routine. Dad's accounts, the estate filings, shouldn't take long." Celeste chimed in with a rehearsed smile. "It's all just paperwork at this point. You know how messy things can get without clarity?" I stirred my oatmeal without answering. It had gone cold. They didn't notice. That afternoon I went for a walk. No destination, just movement. I needed air, space, something that didn't smell like grief masked in lavender candles. I ended up in the old park near the river. The same one where Dad used to take me when I was little, when things inside the house felt too tight. We'd sit under the same oak tree and he'd let me talk about anything. Books, space, why some birds flew away in winter and others didn't. I found that tree again. Older now. A little weathered. Just like me. I sat down in the grass, leaned against the trunk, and pulled the letter back out. It hit differently in the daylight. Not softer exactly, but steadier. Dad hadn't just left me assets. He'd left me a voice, a truth, a choice. He knew what they were capable of. He saw it. And instead of confronting it in life, which maybe he never had the strength to do, he gave me the tools to face it after he was gone, and somehow that meant more. Because it wasn't about the apartment, it wasn't about the money, it was about finally being seen. After years of being the backup plan, the invisible help, the shadow in family photos, he had placed something in my hands that no one else could erase. Validation. Later that night, I sat on the back porch with Simon. I hadn't planned on calling him, but I did. He brought coffee just the way I liked it. Black, strong, no questions asked. We didn't talk much at first, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for anything. Eventually, I handed him the card, the one with his name, the one Dad had tucked inside the envelope. He looked at it, then at me. "So," he said, "you opened it." I nodded. He didn't ask what was inside. Instead, he leaned back and said, "Whatever you need, LYRA, whenever you're ready." That's when I knew. This wasn't going to be a fight over documents. It was going to be a fight over memory, over truth, over who got to tell the story of Raymond Bennett, and who got to rewrite the ending. And this time, I wasn't going to be silent. It wasn't called a meeting, of course. Mom called it a chat. Just a little gathering, she said, to go over next steps, practical things, nothing emotional. As if grief could be sorted into folders and filed neatly away between dinner and dessert. We sat around the old dining table, the one Dad had polished every Thanksgiving, the one that still bore a faint coffee ring he never got around to sanding off. Mom wore her pearls, Celeste wore her confidence, and I wore a cardigan with soup stains on the sleeve. I didn't have the energy to pretend. A stack of documents sat in the center of the table. I hadn't touched them, but I could feel their weight like a storm cloud hanging just above my head. Celeste cleared her throat first. "So," she began, "we've talked with Mr. Caldwell. There's some legal stuff to finalize. Just standard things." Mom jumped in with a thin smile. "Mostly transferring assets, handling the estate, the house, the stocks. Nothing surprising." Then she looked at me. "We need your signature to expedite a few items. Everything's drafted. You'll still be taken care of course." "Of course." I stared at the pen she pushed across the table. Silver, elegant, impersonal. Celeste tilted her head, all sugar and strategy. "We just figured it's easier this way, LYRA. Cleaner. No loose ends." I didn't move. "What exactly am I signing?" I asked. Mom waved a hand as if details were beneath her. "Just a form waiving inheritance claims. It's more symbolic than anything." "Symbolic for who?" Silence. Then Celeste shrugged. "Come on, LYRA. You've never been about money. You've said that yourself." I looked at them both. Really looked. Two women who'd spent years pretending I was furniture. who now wanted to pretend I was family long enough to erase me cleanly from the record. I picked up the pen. They leaned in, just slightly, not eager, expectant, like they were watching a child finally learn her place. And I signed. Every page, every line. When I finished, I placed the pen down gently. Celeste beamed. See, that wasn't so hard. Mom stood to collect the documents. Her movements were smooth, efficient. I looked out the window. The hydrangeas Dad planted last spring were blooming early, pale blue, like they were trying to remind me that beauty could still grow in broken places. I stood. I'll be heading out soon, I said quietly. Mom didn't look up. Of course, I assumed. Celeste sipped her tea. Let us know where you land. She didn't mean it, and I didn't answer. Because what do you say to people who are more concerned with property than presence? As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not defeat, not sadness. Something else. I had just signed away every claim to what they thought mattered. But they didn't know what I already held. They didn't know about Brookline, or the savings, or the letter that said in my father's own words that I was the one he trusted. They thought I had nothing. And for the first time in my life, I was fine with letting them believe that. The thing about entitlement is that it moves quickly. They didn't even wait a full day. Less than 24 hours after I signed away my claims, Celeste and Mom were already in the car, designer tote bags swinging, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. I watched them from the upstairs window, sipping black coffee like it was a front-row ticket to karma. They looked confident, celebratory even, like they'd just closed a successful real estate deal. Mom in her cream blazer clutching a folder labeled Estate Access. Celeste scrolling through her phone, probably texting someone about finally tying up loose ends. What they didn't know, what they hadn't even thought to ask, was that the account they were heading toward was already empty. Dad had moved it months ago. It wasn't hiding. Just relocated, protected, labeled under a quiet LLC he'd set up with Simon's help. It was all legal, all clean, all his decision, and now it was all mine. At 10:43 a.m., I got a text from Simon, just 2 words. They're there. I smiled. Back at the bank, I imagined the scene unfolding. Mom leaning forward, voice firm, asking to access the trust account. Celeste nodding confidently beside her, rehearsed smiles at the teller. And then, the pause. The kind that makes stomachs sink. I'm sorry, the banker says, tapping at her keyboard. There's no available balance. Celeste laughs, a brittle, confused sound. There must be a mistake. We were told this account was holding... The banker interrupts gently. No mistake. The account was transferred several months ago. It's no longer associated with this branch. Or this estate. Mom's face stiffens. That smile she wears like armor falters. What do you mean transferred? Transferred where? I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, the banker replies. The account owner made those changes personally. And just like that, the mask shatters. I didn't see it happen, but I didn't need to. I knew my mother's voice when it rose, knew how her earrings always caught the light when she gestured too hard in frustration, knew the exact pitch of Celeste's laugh when it twisted into disbelief. The silence that followed would have been deafening. They drove home slower than they left. No sunglasses this time. When they walked through the front door, neither of them spoke to me. They didn't have to. The air around them reeked of something they'd never admit out loud. Defeat. That night, I found Mom in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator like it owed her an explanation. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. He told you, didn't he? I didn't answer. She turned to face me. You knew we'd go. You let us humiliate ourselves. I held her gaze. You did that all on your own. She flinched, just slightly. Then she walked out of the room slower than usual, older than usual. And I stood there for once, not shrinking, not apologizing. I wasn't proud of what happened, but I wasn't sorry either. Because that moment, more than any inheritance, any apartment, any letter, was proof. Proof that they had underestimated the wrong daughter. You'd think betrayal would come with fire. Raised voices, slammed doors, a final showdown worthy of a movie ending. But in this house, it came quietly, like water seeping through a crack in the ceiling. Slow, relentless, impossible to ignore. The morning after their failed trip to the bank, I found Mom sitting in the formal living room, still dressed in yesterday's blazer, the sleeves wrinkled, the pearls now resting slightly crooked on her collarbone. She didn't acknowledge me. She just stared ahead, eyes locked on the fireplace that hadn't been lit since Dad's last Christmas. Celeste stormed in minutes later, tossing her designer bag onto the couch like it had personally betrayed her. "I talked to Caldwell again," she snapped. "He said the account was real, substantial. So where the hell did it go?" Mom didn't answer. Celeste kept pacing. "This isn't right. He wouldn't just do that. He wouldn't cut us out." Mom finally blinked. "He didn't cut us out." There was a pause. Then Celeste's eyes narrowed. "You knew." It wasn't a question. Mom straightened slowly, adjusting the hem of her jacket. "I suspected." Toward the end, he was quieter, less compliant. Celeste crossed her arms. "And you didn't stop him?" A bead of silence stretched between them, thick as fog, and in that space something shifted. The alliance that had always existed between them, mother and favorite, began to crack. "I was taking care of him," Mom said sharply. "You were off drinking cocktails and curating your perfect little Instagram life." Celeste's jaw tightened. "And you were too busy planning brunches and Botox appointments to notice your husband was rewriting the family history." The words landed hard, heavy. I stood in the hallway, invisible but listening. Not hiding, just waiting. They hadn't noticed me in weeks. Why would now be any different? Mom rose to her feet, her voice cold. "I gave my life to this family. I sacrificed—" "Oh, please," Celeste cut in. "You sacrificed convenience. That's not the same thing." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice glass. Eventually, Celeste grabbed her bag again and muttered something about needing air. The front door slammed. And for the first time since Dad died, the house felt like it belonged to no one. That night, I made tea and took it out to the porch. I didn't need to celebrate. I didn't need revenge. What I needed, what I had been craving for years, was exactly what I was beginning to taste. Stillness, and the knowledge that truth once uncovered doesn't need to shout, it just needs time to echo. They stopped speaking the next day. Not with a dramatic fight or slamming doors, just a strange, cold absence where conversation used to be. Celeste moved through the house like she was allergic to it. She no longer lingered in the kitchen or fussed with her skincare in the master bathroom. Instead, she paced. Always with her phone in hand, always in motion, like standing still might make her disappear entirely. Mom spent most of her time at the dining room table, surrounded by unopened mail and empty wine glasses. Her makeup was still immaculate, but her eyes had lost the sharpness they once carried. I watched them orbit each other in silence. Two women who had once walked in perfect step, now moving in completely opposite directions. Until the realtor arrived. It was a Thursday afternoon, sunny, deceptively cheerful. He was young, too enthusiastic, and far too chipper for what he was walking into. "I've run the comps," he said, flipping open a sleek black folder. "If we want to move quickly, we need to list next week." Mom nodded stiffly. Her fingers were wrapped around the stem of a wine glass she hadn't touched. Celeste stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. "No staging?" The realtor hesitated. "We could," he said carefully, "but buyers are moving fast right now. Inventory's tight." They nodded like they understood, like they were part of this process. But the truth was they weren't guiding it. They were being carried by it. This wasn't a choice. This was a consequence. After he left, Celeste finally broke the silence. "I can't believe this is happening." Her voice cracked, not in grief, but in frustration. Mom didn't respond. Celeste turned toward her, voice rising. "We were supposed to inherit this. We were supposed to build on it, sell it later for more. You said you were handling it." Mom's expression didn't change. "I said I was trying. Your father made other decisions." Celeste laughed bitterly. "And you just let him?" Mom's hands clenched slightly, but her tone remained even. "Don't pretend you were here for any of it." Celeste scoffed. "I was building my life." "No," Mom replied. "You were building a stage." The room went silent again, heavier this time. Celeste grabbed her bag and keys. "I'll be staying with Jeremy for a while." Jeremy. The boyfriend with the condo and the Audi and the emotional range of a dinner napkin. She didn't say goodbye. She just left. And Mom? She didn't chase her. Didn't even look up. That night, the house felt emptier than ever. No arguments, no whispers, just the quiet hum of something undone. I walked through the living room slowly, trailing my fingers along the edge of the mantel. A few framed photos still sat there, one of Celeste in her graduation cap, one of Mom at some charity gala. No pictures of Dad, none of me. I didn't remove them, didn't straighten them, I just kept walking. Because some things aren't worth fixing. Some rooms need to stay quiet so the truth can echo properly. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. The kind with bold red letters and a smiling realtor's face in the bottom corner. It looked almost cheerful, like it had no idea what kind of house it was standing in front of. I watched from the upstairs window as the post went into the lawn. 2 quick hammer strikes. Clean, final. Mom didn't come outside. She watched from the hallway, arms folded, mouth set tight like a zipper she refused to open. The house, the one Dad spent his weekends fixing, painting, protecting, was now just another property on the market. Just another asset to unload. And Celeste? She was gone. She didn't leave in a storm of rage or regret. She just texted Mom that she was taking space and wouldn't be coming back until things felt less toxic. No one asked what toxic meant. No one had the energy. Mom moved through the days like a wind-up doll that had lost its rhythm. She stopped wearing lipstick, stopped answering calls, spent most afternoons on the sun porch in a bathrobe, staring at the hydrangeas Dad planted 2 springs ago. One morning, I found her sorting through boxes in the garage. She was sitting on a dusty folding chair with a stack of old letters in her lap and a bottle of Chardonnay at her feet. She didn't hear me come in. "Did you know," she said without turning, "that your father once wrote me a poem? Back in college." Her voice was thinner than I remembered. Brittle. "I threw it away after the first baby was born. I didn't have time for poetry." I didn't answer. She looked at me finally, eyes glassy. I thought I was doing the right thing. Building something solid, stable. I didn't realize I was building a story where I only existed in the margins. I wanted to say that she had written that story herself. But I didn't. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest truth you can offer someone. The next week, the first couple came to tour the house. They were young, newly married. She had a soft laugh. He took pictures of the backyard like it already belonged to them. I stayed out of sight, upstairs in what used to be Dad's study. From the window, I watched them stand in the yard beneath the oak tree where we used to hang wind chimes. I imagined them building a life there. Not perfect, but honest. And strangely, that thought didn't make me sad. It made me feel something close to peace. Later that evening, as Mom shuffled past me in the hallway, she paused. Her voice was quiet. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" I nodded. She didn't ask where, didn't ask why. She just said, "Take whatever you want. Nothing feels like mine anymore." And for the first time in years, she wasn't blaming anyone. Not me, not Celeste, not even Dad. Just herself. She walked on, and I stood in that hallway for a long time, thinking about how houses break long before walls crack. Sometimes they break in whispers, in glances never returned, in love never spoken aloud. And once they're broken, no sale sign can fix what was lost inside. The house sold faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks after the listing went live, a couple from Vermont put in a full cash offer. No inspection, no delays, just a clean break. It was exactly what Mom said she wanted. She packed her things slowly, as if the act of folding clothes might somehow buy her more time. But time doesn't pause for regret. It just moves, like a train you didn't hear coming until the wind hits your face. Celeste never came back. She sent one last message, short, blunt. "Tell Mom I'm staying with Jeremy. I'll call when I'm ready." But she didn't call. Not then. Not later. The boxes disappeared. The furniture was sold off in chunks. The kitchen chairs went to a neighbor. The piano Dad once played ended up with a family who wanted to teach their daughter Chopin. Mom rented a small apartment across town. 2 bedrooms, ground floor, no garden, no porch swing, no history. Just beige walls and a lease she didn't bother reading closely. I helped her move, though she didn't ask. We loaded what was left of her life into a rented van. I watched her tape boxes labeled winter coats and books I might read someday like it was all perfectly normal, but nothing about it was normal. At one point, she stood in the empty living room and looked around as if trying to memorize the emptiness. "This isn't how it was supposed to end," she said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because that sentence wasn't meant for me. It was meant for the version of herself she thought she'd become. Later, at her new apartment, she offered me tea she didn't know how to brew. She burned the water. We sat in silence on mismatched chairs, drinking something that tasted like regret and weak jasmine. When I got up to leave, she walked me to the door. No hug, no apology, just a quiet, tired look. Like she finally understood what she had lost. And maybe what she never really had. I walked out into the early evening, air crisp with the first hints of fall. The sun dipped low behind the apartment building. Shadows stretched long across the pavement, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the pull to turn back. Not to help, not to explain, not to fix what wasn't mine to fix. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with a courtroom or a raised voice. Sometimes it comes when people are left alone with exactly what they chose, and I was finally free to choose something else. I moved into the Brookline apartment on a Sunday morning. It was quiet, gray, and slightly chilly, the kind of day that never quite makes up its mind between rain or sunlight. I liked that. It felt honest. The building was older, with ivy curling around its brick facade and creaky wooden steps that let you know someone was coming before they knocked. There was no doorman, no marble lobby, just a small buzzer, a dented mailbox, and a landlord named Mrs. Callahan who smelled like lavender and moved slower than time. But when I stepped inside apartment 3B, I exhaled like I hadn't in years. It wasn't fancy. The floorboards creaked and the windows needed recaulking. The kitchen counters were chipped at the corners, and the bathroom mirror had a scratch that ran across the glass like a hairline fracture. But it was mine, not borrowed, not shared, not something I had to ask permission to exist in. It was quiet in the best way. No passive-aggressive footsteps, no sighs from behind closed doors. Just the hum of a refrigerator, the occasional creak of old wood, and the birds outside singing like they didn't know anything about betrayal. I spent the first hour walking through each room barefoot, letting my heels press into the floor, testing the way light moved through the windows at different angles. The living room caught morning sun. The bedroom smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. In the hallway closet, I found a box of my father's books, ones he must have tucked away years ago. They were worn, underlined in pencil, and full of margin notes that only made sense to him. I ran my fingers over the titles, philosophy, history, a few dog-eared science fiction paperbacks, and felt something warm rise in my chest, like he had left them as breadcrumbs, proof that he had been planning this long before I was ready. That afternoon, Simon stopped by with a folding table, 2 chairs, and a bag of groceries. He didn't knock, just texted outside, and waited on the stoop like it was the most natural thing in the world. We set up the table in the kitchen. He unpacked oranges, tea bags, and a small chocolate cake that he said was just because. He didn't ask how I was settling in. He didn't ask about Mom or Celeste. He just handed me a screwdriver and helped me reattach a loose cabinet door. And in that silence, something gentle settled between us. Later, we sat on the balcony with mugs of chamomile, watching as the light began to fade and the sky turned a dusty lavender. He pointed to the empty railing. "You should plant something here." "I was thinking bougainvillea," I said, almost to myself. He smiled. "Your dad would have liked that." I nodded, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Not because we had nothing to say, but because some piece is too full for words. When he left, I walked back through the apartment slowly, touching the walls like they were pages in a book I'd just started reading. I stood in the bedroom doorway, looking at the blank wall across from the bed. Not empty, just waiting. That night, I slept with the windows open. The breeze carried in the scent of jasmine from the building next door. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't dream about proving anything. I didn't dream about being chosen. I just slept. Like someone who knew without question that she had finally come home. It didn't happen all at once. Healing, I mean. It came in quiet waves. The kind you don't notice until one day you realize you're no longer flinching at every unexpected sound. No longer checking your phone, hoping for a text that never comes. No longer measuring your worth by who does or doesn't show up. Simon started coming by more often. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes a toolbox. Once he showed up with a single paintbrush and 3 sample cards taped to his arm like swatches of new possibility. "I thought this wall needed a second chance," he said, grinning. We chose a soft sage green, spent an afternoon painting and talking about everything except the past. The conversation wandered, favorite childhood snacks, ridiculous fears, the best movie to cry to when no one's watching. He told me about his mom, How she raised him alone. How she never missed a parent-teacher night but always burned the chicken. I told him about the summer Dad taught me how to whistle using a blade of grass. We laughed until our arms ached from holding paint rollers. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was real. One Saturday, he brought over a wooden planter box and a climbing bougainvillea vine. It was tiny, scraggly really, just a few green shoots and one stubborn blossom trying to bloom. But it was ours. We installed it together on the balcony, hands dirty, shirts sweaty, hearts steady. "Think it'll make it through the winter?" I asked. Simon looked at the vine, then at me. "Most things do," he said, "if someone believes in them." A few weeks later, we sat on that same balcony, drinking coffee and watching the vine stretch slowly upward. He turned to me, cleared his throat. "So, I was thinking." That phrase usually signals trouble, or a plan, or sometimes both. "I don't need anything big," he said. "No churches, no matching napkins, just you, and maybe a lemon cake." I blinked. "You're asking?" He shrugged. "Not if you're not saying yes." I didn't say yes. I just leaned in and kissed him. And that was enough. The wedding wasn't big. In fact, it was barely a wedding at all by most people's standards. 15 people, a friend's backyard, folded chairs and a string of lights hung from 2 tired trees. I wore a dress I found at a thrift shop, off-white, linen. Comfortable. He wore his father's watch and a tie he hated. We said our vows barefoot, standing on the grass, the wind messing up my hair and neither of us caring. There were no speeches from family. No awkward toasts. No performance. Just the people who mattered. And a kind of silence that didn't ache anymore. It held us. Wrapped around us like a soft blanket instead of a cold reminder. Mom didn't come. Celeste didn't call. And that felt right. Not out of spite, but out of truth. They belonged to another chapter. One I had closed without fanfare. After everyone left, Simon and I stayed outside. The lights still glowed gently above us. The leftover cake sat half-eaten on a paper plate between us. He reached for my hand. "I can't promise perfect," he said. I smiled. "I'm not asking for perfect." He looked at me, something soft behind his eyes. "Just don't disappear." "I've spent too long being invisible," I said. "I'm done with that." And I meant it, every word. That night we walked home, fingers intertwined like they'd always known the shape of each other. The city felt different, slower, kinder. Maybe it hadn't changed. Maybe I had. At the apartment, the bougainvillea caught my eye again. It had grown more than I expected. A single bloom now hung low near the railing. Bold, bright, undeniably alive. I touched it gently. It didn't wilt. It was late afternoon when the light changed. That golden hour kind of light. The kind that slips through windows like a memory you didn't expect but suddenly remember in full color. I was alone in the apartment. Simon had gone out to pick up groceries. The radio played softly in the background, something jazzy and old, the kind of music Dad would have tapped his fingers to while stirring a pot of stew. I was sitting on the floor of the living room sorting through books we'd unpacked but hadn't shelved yet. A little stack of poetry, a few memoirs, some things I'd bought and never read, some I'd kept because he had loved them. The apartment smelled faintly of eucalyptus and lemon, left over from the candle we lit during breakfast. Outside, a breeze rattled the window panes just enough to remind me that fall was near. My eyes drifted to the corner shelf. A small black and white photo of Dad sat in a simple wooden frame. He wasn't smiling. He never really did for photos. But his eyes looked alive, intentional, present. Next to it was a tiny ceramic pot with a green sprout just beginning to push through the soil. I'd planted it 3 weeks ago and forgotten about it. I wasn't even sure it would grow. But there it was, one slender green stem curving toward the light like it knew exactly where to go. I stood up and walked over, crouching to get a closer look. The soil was still damp. The roots had found their place. It was growing quietly, without permission, without applause, and for some reason it made my chest ache in the best possible way. I reached out, took the photo of Dad, and held it in my hands. I sat back on the couch, balancing the frame on my lap. "I did it," I whispered. Not in triumph, not as some final victory speech. Just as a truth I needed to say aloud. I didn't mean the money, or the apartment, or even the wedding. I meant me. I had survived what was meant to break me. I had outgrown a story I was never meant to carry. I had stopped asking to be chosen, And in doing so, I had chosen myself. That was the difference. Dad once told me the most important decisions in life rarely feel loud. They arrive like whispers, he said. The trick is learning how to hear them. I hadn't always listened, but I was listening now. The sun sank lower outside the window. Shadows stretched across the floor like long, quiet reminders that everything ends, and everything begins again. I placed the photo on the shelf next to the sprout, not centered, not staged, just where it felt right. Then I stood up, opened the balcony door, and let the breeze fill the apartment. The bougainvillea rustled against the railing. More blooms had appeared since last week. I hadn't even noticed. It struck me then that healing doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up, in the form of petals, or silence, or a photo frame beside a sprout that no one believed would grow. And you realize, without warning, that you're not living in survival anymore. You're simply living. The sun was low when I stepped out onto the balcony, not the blinding kind of sunset, the soft kind, the kind that wraps the world in amber and makes even the cracked sidewalks look like something worth remembering. I carried a mug of tea and the photo of Dad. Just me, the fading light, and a silence that no longer felt heavy. The bougainvillea had started curling over the railing, small clusters of pink blooms stretching outward as if reaching for something beyond the brick and mortar. For the first time, I let myself believe it would survive the winter. I placed the photo frame on the little shelf Simon had built from old wine crates. Next to it was the ceramic pot, the one with the sprout that had grown into something tall and upright. Still young, still delicate, but holding its own. Kind of like me. I sat in the chair with the worn cushion and pulled my knees to my chest. The tea steamed gently, sweetened with just enough honey. Below, the street was quiet. A kid on a scooter zipped by, his laughter trailing behind him like ribbon. A couple walked hand in hand. Someone watered their plants across the courtyard. Life was happening without spectacle, without permission, without the need to be anything more than it already was. And I was part of it. No longer the girl waiting to be seen. No longer the daughter trying to earn her place at a table set for someone else. I didn't need the apology. I didn't need the reconciliation. I didn't even need to be right. I just needed this moment. The stillness. The choice to sit with my story and not flinch. Dad once told me, peace isn't something you find. It's something you stop running from. And I had stopped. Not all at once, but enough. The sky had begun to shift from gold to a soft lavender when I finally spoke aloud. Not to anyone, just to the fading light, to the plants, to myself. You were right, Dad. It came out like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the funeral. You were right about the quiet things, about how peace doesn't come with grand gestures or fireworks. It comes when you no longer need the world to validate your worth. I thought for so long that love had to be earned, that I needed to be better, louder, more impressive just to be noticed, just to be allowed a seat at the table. But you never asked that of me. You never needed me to prove anything. You just saw me. In the way you let me speak without interrupting, in the way you taught me to fix broken clocks, in the way you said, you don't have to shine for anyone but yourself. I didn't understand those words back then. Now I do. Because I've stopped shining for them and started living for me. I looked at the small table beside me, where your letter still sat, the edges worn from being read too many times, the ink slightly smudged from the time I cried on it without meaning to. You didn't leave me riches. You left me something better, a door, and the key to walk through it. This apartment, this life, this stillness. It's not glamorous. No one's jealous of it. But it's mine. I wake up in it every morning without fear. I go to sleep without having to shrink. And maybe that's the point. Maybe healing isn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it's about finally coming home to who you were before they told you that you weren't enough. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the floor like a quiet benediction. Inside the apartment, the shadows grew longer, softer, like the edges of an old memory finally beginning to fade. I walked to the bookshelf and picked up Dad's photo one last time that evening. He looked the same, of course, steady eyes, that familiar crease between his brows. But something about the way I looked at him had changed. I didn't see loss anymore. I saw legacy, not in money, not in land or property, but in the quiet courage he passed on to me. I placed the photo on the shelf again, next to the sprouting plant that had somehow made it through weeks of neglect, bad light, and my own doubt. It didn't bloom fast, but it grew. Slowly. Surely. On its own terms. I reached out and straightened the frame. And then, I let go. Not of him. Of needing to be who they never let me be. Of carrying stories that were never mine to hold. Of asking permission to choose my life. That was the true inheritance. Not what he gave me, but what he reminded me I already had. My voice, my freedom, my name. And now, if you're still listening, maybe this part is for you. If you've ever been the one left off the guest list. If you've ever been told you're too much, or not enough, or somehow always the problem. If you've ever waited for love that never came, or fought for a place that was never yours to begin with. Let me tell you what my father told me. You don't owe anyone your silence, and you sure as hell don't need their permission to be whole, so go. Plant something, name it after yourself if you have to, and when it blooms, because it will, stand beside it. Not to prove anything, just to remember that you did, because sometimes healing means letting go, and letting silence speak the truth. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there might still be living in the shadows of someone else's version of love. Let them know they're allowed to walk away, and they're more than enough, even in the quiet.